The first time he followed her, it wasn't planned. He was already late leaving work when he saw her walking away from the school, his child's backpack still hanging from her shoulder. She didn't head toward her car. She walked past the parking lot, past the familiar streets, and toward the bus stop. Something in his chest tightened, and before he could talk himself out of it, he turned the wheel and followed at a distance. She got off the bus 20 minutes later, in a part of town he rarely visited. The streetlights flickered. The houses were close together, tired looking. She didn't stop at any of them. Instead, she crossed the street and slipped through the back door of a small diner, tying her hair up as she walked. Through the open door, he heard a man say, sharp and impatient, "You're late. Go change." He parked across the street and watched her reappear minutes later, now wearing an apron. She moved fast, taking orders, pouring coffee, forcing a polite smile. This wasn't a quick errand. This was a second job. The woman who helped his child every day was working nights too, and she had never said a word about it. Then he heard her voice behind the building, low and unguarded, pressed into a phone. "I can't tell the kid," she said. "He worries too much already. I promised I'd be okay." Her voice cracked, and she paused, breathing through it. He felt the words land heavier than he expected. As he drove home, the image wouldn't leave him. His child that morning, carefully packing her lunch. The way she had asked if their helper was tired. The way she had smiled anyway. By the time he pulled into the driveway, one thought settled in, cold and unsettling. This wasn't just about money. And whatever was really going on, his child was already in the middle of it. He had been a father long enough to believe he understood control. After the divorce, control was how he survived. Fixed schedules, clear rules, careful choices about who entered his child's life. It wasn't about being strict, it was about keeping chaos away. Especially after losing trust once, he told himself vigilance was the same as love. The woman he hired had fit perfectly into that order. She showed up every day on time. She listened. She knelt down to speak to his child at eye level. She remembered small things, favorite snacks, school projects, fears that came out only in whispers. Slowly, too slowly for him to notice, she became part of their routine. Part of the quiet stability he depended on. But stability has a way of hiding cracks. The more he replayed that night in his head, the diner, the apron, the phone call, the more unsettled he became. Why hadn't she said anything? Why keep something like that from him? Old memories crept in. Promises once made. Truths once hidden. He'd learned the hard way that silence often came with a price. At home, he watched his child more closely. Noticed how carefully they spoke about her. How they worried. How they tried to protect her feelings in ways no child should have to. The realization made his chest tighten. Whatever this situation was, it wasn't simple. And it wasn't just between two adults. If stories like this matter to you, stories about family, trust, and the quiet moments that change everything, consider subscribing to the channel. These are the kinds of stories that don't shout for attention, but stay with you long after they end. And as he stood in the hallway that night, listening to his child sleep, he understood one thing clearly. The truth he feared most was still ahead of him, and it would force him to decide what kind of father he was really going to be. The days after that night began to feel different, heavier. He found himself watching her more closely than before, not openly, but from the edges of the room. The way she entered the house quietly. How she set her bag down with care, as if afraid to make noise. He told himself he was just being attentive, but deep down, something sharper had taken root. He noticed the shadows under her eyes first. Darker than before. Permanent, as if sleep had become optional. When she bent to pick up his child's backpack, her hands trembled slightly, just enough to catch his attention. She smiled through it, brushing it off as nothing. To him, it felt like evidence. Every small detail began to rearrange itself in his mind. The way she declined coffee. The way she never mentioned her evenings. The way she always insisted she was fine. Slowly, quietly, he started attaching meaning where there had been none. If she was struggling, he reasoned, then maybe she had an angle. Maybe she needed them more than she admitted. That thought unlocked something old and ugly. A memory he hadn't visited in years. His ex-wife standing in the kitchen late at night, whispering into her phone, asking for money she never told him about, promising it was temporary, promising it meant nothing. He remembered how blind he had been back then, how trust had cost him more than he could afford. The two images began to overlap in his mind, even though he resisted it. Different women, different circumstances, but the same silence, the same feeling of being kept in the dark. He hated himself for making the comparison, but once it existed, he couldn't erase it. So he decided to be careful. Careful meant prepared. Prepared meant knowing more than he currently did. One evening, after his child had gone to bed, he opened his laptop and searched her name again. Slowly, thoroughly. Old employers, past addresses, anything that might offer clarity. There wasn't much. A few short-term jobs, gaps that went unexplained. No scandals, no red flags, just very little. The absence itself began to feel suspicious. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen, convincing himself that honest people usually left clearer trails behind them. The next morning, his tone changed without him realizing it. Shorter sentences, more questions, casual ones, disguised as interest. She answered politely, without defensiveness, which somehow unsettled him even more. Trust, once cracked, doesn't break loudly. It erodes quietly, decision by decision. His child noticed before either adult acknowledged it. The conversations grew shorter. Laughter disappeared from the kitchen. The house felt tighter, like everyone was holding their breath. And as he watched her tie her coat and reach for the door that afternoon, he made a silent decision that would change everything. Because if his instincts were right, he couldn't afford to wait any longer. And if they were wrong, the cost of finding out might be even higher. The change didn't happen all at once. It crept in quietly, disguised as responsibility. He began coming home earlier than usual, parking in the driveway while she was still there, watching from the window instead of announcing himself. When he entered, his presence shifted the air. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Routines hesitated. He told himself this was what an involved father did. He stayed close, he paid attention. He stopped greeting her the way he used to. No small talk. No casual warmth. Instructions replaced conversation. If she suggested an activity, he asked why. If she mentioned a plan, he wanted details. The tone wasn't loud or aggressive, just precise, clipped, distant. Control wrapped itself in calm language. Soon, he began interrupting moments that had once belonged to them. He arrived early during homework time, sat at the table without speaking, watching. When they played a game, he checked the clock. When they laughed, he cleared his throat. Nothing was forbidden outright, but nothing felt free anymore. Questions followed her everywhere. Why did she take that street home? Why did she leave 5 minutes earlier yesterday? Why did she choose that snack instead of the other one? Each question was framed as concern, but repeated often enough to sound like suspicion. She answered every one without protest, though her shoulders stiffened a little more each day. The child noticed immediately. Small signs at first, fidgeting fingers, glances toward the door when he arrived. Laughter became quieter, cautious. When she spoke, she checked his face first, as if asking permission without words. He saw it and felt a flicker of discomfort, but pushed it aside. Dinner became tense. The child ate slower, eyes lowered. When she tried to tell a story about school, it faded halfway through. He corrected small details unnecessarily, reminding her of rules that hadn't mattered before. The woman sat silently, hands folded, as if afraid to take up space. That night, as he tucked his child into bed, the room felt unfamiliar. The usual questions, about stories, about tomorrow, didn't come. Instead, the child stared at the ceiling for a long moment, then turned her head slowly toward him. Her voice was small, careful. "Did I do something wrong?" The question landed harder than anything he'd heard in weeks. He opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. Words lined up and collapsed. He didn't know how to explain suspicion without accusation, fear without blame. So he said nothing. He smoothed the blanket, kissed her forehead, and turned off the light. The silence followed him out of the room. Over the next days, the change deepened. The child withdrew further, retreating into herself. She asked fewer questions. She watched more. The woman moved through the house, like a guest who had overstayed, polite and invisible. And late one evening, as he stood in the hallway listening to the muffled sound of whispered voices behind a closed door, he realized something was happening without him. Something fragile. Something he might already be too late to stop. By the following afternoon, his patience had thinned into resolve. Watching and wondering had only sharpened his unease, and unease, to him, demanded action. He told himself he wouldn't accuse her of anything, not yet. Instead, he would approach the problem sideways, with something practical, something reasonable. If there was a hidden motive, money would expose it. He chose his moment carefully. The house was quiet, his child in her room working on a puzzle, the door not fully closed. In the kitchen, the woman was organizing papers from school, moving with her usual efficiency. He cleared his throat, kept his voice neutral, and said he'd been reviewing their arrangement. Then, without softening the words, he told her he was offering a raise. She looked up at him, clearly surprised, but not pleased. There was no smile, no hesitation. Almost immediately, she shook her head. "I didn't ask for more," she said. Her tone was calm, steady. Then she added, unmistakably, "I'm fine." She went back to stacking the papers, as if the matter were settled. The speed of her refusal unsettled him. He had expected questions, gratitude, at least curiosity. Instead, he felt shut out. The offer had been meant to open a door, and she had closed it without discussion. In his mind, that refusal didn't signal honesty, it signaled concealment. He tried again, this time framing it as concern. He mentioned long hours, fatigue, stability. She finally met his eyes, and there was something firm there, something that didn't bend. "I'm not here for money," she said quietly. "I never was." There was no apology in her voice, no explanation, only certainty. That certainty irritated him. It felt rehearsed, almost defensive in its confidence. If she wasn't there for the money, then what was she there for? Obligation? Pity? Something tied to a past he didn't know? The unanswered questions crowded his thoughts as she picked up her bag and left for the day without another word. That evening, after his child went to bed, he sat alone at the dining table with his laptop open. He wasn't searching anymore. He was preparing. He reviewed employment terms, notice periods, contingency plans. He drafted polite phrases in his head, phrases that sounded responsible and measured. For safety, for consistency, for what's best for the child. Each justification made the decision feel cleaner. He told himself that uncertainty was dangerous, that removing it was an act of protection. He convinced himself that if something felt wrong, waiting only made it worse. Ending it now, quietly, would prevent greater harm later. What he didn't know was that the hallway floorboard outside the dining room creaked softly. His child had stepped out of her room for water and stopped when she heard his voice. She stood still, half hidden by the wall, listening as he spoke on the phone to a colleague about letting her go and not taking risks. The words were fragments, but the meaning landed all the same. The child pressed her back against the wall, heart racing, trying to understand how someone who felt so permanent could disappear. She returned to her room silently, climbed into bed, and stared at the door with wide, frightened eyes. And as he closed his laptop, convinced he was doing the right thing, a secret had already settled in the house. One that would soon force the truth into the open, whether he was ready for it or not. The confrontation came late that night, long after the house had gone quiet. He was sitting on the edge of the couch, lights dimmed, replaying conversations in his head, when he heard soft footsteps in the hallway. His child stood there in her pajamas, eyes red, hands clenched into the sleeves. She didn't ask permission to enter. She walked straight toward him, carrying something heavy she could no longer hold alone. Before he could speak, she broke down. Tears came fast and uncontrolled, her words tangled at first. He reached for her, but she pulled back, shaking her head. "Please," she said, voice cracking. "You can't make her leave." The plea startled him. He hadn't told her anything yet. Not directly. He asked her what she meant, gently at first, then with rising concern. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and looked at him, eyes wide and shining. "I know about her second job," she said. The words landed like a physical blow. He froze, unsure he'd heard correctly. She explained between sobs that she had known for a long time. She'd seen the tired eyes, the rushed goodbyes, the nights when she left earlier than usual. "I heard her once," the child said. "On the phone. She was crying." She admitted she had pretended not to know, nodding along whenever the woman said she was fine. "I didn't want her to feel bad," the child said. "She already worked so hard." Her voice steadied as she spoke, as if telling the truth gave her strength. She said she worried that if anyone talked about it, the woman would leave. Or worse, feel ashamed for needing more than one job. Then came the confession that broke him. The child walked to her room and returned with a small metal box. Inside were loose coins, carefully stacked. Pennies, nickels, dimes. "I was saving these," she said softly, "so I could help her someday." She'd hidden the box under her bed, adding to it whenever she could. He stared at the coins, each one suddenly heavier than the last. This wasn't imagination or misunderstanding. This was planning. Care. A child carrying responsibility that didn't belong to her. He felt something twist painfully in his chest. "She stayed when everyone else left," the child said then, looking straight at him. The sentence was simple. Final. It held years of absence he'd never spoken about out loud. The words stripped away every justification he'd built for himself. Silence filled the room. He couldn't argue. He couldn't explain. All he could see was how deeply wrong he'd been, and how little time he might have left to make it right. Because somewhere between suspicion and control, he had become the one his child was afraid of losing next. Sleep never came that night. He sat at the kitchen table until morning, staring at the small metal box his child had left behind. The coins were still inside, neatly stacked, as if order could make the burden lighter. With every passing hour, one truth became unavoidable. His child had been protecting both adults, quietly holding together something he had been too afraid to face himself. When the house finally stirred, he asked the woman to stay a few minutes after the child left for school. His voice was different now, lower, stripped of edge. There was no accusation in his posture, no crossed arms or guarded distance. Just exhaustion. She sensed it immediately and sat across from him, waiting. He didn't lead with explanations. He asked one question, carefully. "Why didn't you ever ask for help?" The silence that followed wasn't defensive. It was thoughtful. She looked down at her hands, rubbing her thumb against a faint scar, then breathed out slowly. She told him she hadn't come into their lives by chance. Years ago, after his wife became ill, her best friend had reached out. Someone trustworthy. Someone steady. Someone who wouldn't treat the child like a job. She had agreed then, not for money, but because of the woman who asked. From her bag, she pulled out her phone. The screen glowed softly as she scrolled through old messages, dates from years ago. His wife's name appeared again and again. Simple words. Gratitude. Relief. Trust. One message stood out. "Thank you for loving my child when I can't always be there." His breath caught. She explained that she had promised to care for the child as if she were family, especially if things became harder. After the death, walking away had never felt like an option. She stayed because leaving would have meant breaking that promise. She looked up at him then, eyes steady. "I never stayed for the money," she said quietly. "I stayed because I said I would." There was no expectation in her voice. No demand for understanding. Just truth, offered without defense. The room felt unbearably still. He couldn't speak. The words he prepared dissolved. Images flooded in. His wife's smile, her trust, the life he tried to preserve through control. He lowered his head, hands gripping the edge of the table, shoulders shaking without sound. She didn't move to comfort him. She didn't need to. The truth had already done its work. And as he sat there, broken open by what he had nearly destroyed, one realization rose above the rest. The choice he made next would decide whether the promise she kept would finally be honored, or lost forever. The apology came quietly the next morning. No explanations. No defenses. He knelt in front of her, met her eyes, and said he was sorry. Sorry for doubting. Sorry for making her feel unwelcome. Sorry for forgetting what trust looked like. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He let the words stand on their own, finally understanding that some apologies only matter when they aren't followed by reasons. After that, he changed in ways that didn't need announcements. He stopped checking the clock. Stopped questioning routes, meals, and small decisions that had never truly been his to control. When she spoke, he listened. When she made choices, he respected them. The house grew quieter, not with tension, but with ease. There was no sudden romance, no emotional rush to replace what had been broken. What grew instead was steadier. Mutual respect. Clear boundaries. A shared understanding centered on one thing, the child. Mornings returned to routine. Afternoons found their rhythm again. Stability replaced suspicion. The change showed most clearly in the child. Laughter returned without hesitation. Shoulders relaxed. Questions came freely again. The careful watchfulness faded, replaced by simple joy. One evening, as they sat together at the table, the child smiled without checking anyone's face first. That smile stayed with him longer than any argument ever had. In time, he understood what had taken him so long to learn. Protection isn't built from control or constant vigilance. It doesn't come from watching every step or guarding against every fear. Real protection is quieter and harder. It's choosing trust even when it feels risky, especially then.